Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for coming to identifying, managing, and monitoring participant risk. Lovely to have you here. Lovely to have some new faces, and for those who'll be watching at another time by recording, welcome to all of you too. And for those of you who haven't met me who are watching by recording, um, I'm Gina, Effective Policy. I've got about 25, 30 years in these sectors, and I am an auditor. I'm a consultant. I do also run an NDIS business as well. So I've got a bit of a mix of all of those things. So I've got a bit of a passion for risk assessment and for assisting providers to do well, but not simply by giving them a marketing lead campaign that generates leads and then adds to the more problems that we have in this sector, which I am seeing a lot of people marketing their lead generation services. We'll do that. We have a complete service, but the fact is that we want to make sure that you've got your quality and compliance and your business in shape to be able to do that, so that participants don't get hurt and staff don't get hurt. So that's what it's all about. People not getting hurt, people getting the service that they paid for. So let's kick off. All right. So I just want to talk through a couple of things before we go straight into looking, at my process for risk assessment. I want to set a scene, and that is that, we know and we've known for a long time that, up to 80% of patients are harmed in healthcare settings through things that could have been avoided through a proper assessment or risk assessment, yeah? And that they weren't the mitigation strategies in place. Now, clearly, we're talking about patient healthcare, but we will see relations to our settings as well, because it's very similar. As much as we really, I think that the government try to avoid saying care. You're giving as much care, and you're giving clinical care at times, which is well beyond some providers and their workers' knowledge and scope. And I think, there's no value in not admitting what it is. It quacks like a duck, it's a duck. So if we're doing Module 1 services, I don't care if there's a legislative framework that allows support workers to do that. That's great, but we're still giving clinical care. So we've got to call it as it is. There's a lot of clinical care going on. It's expected from people who don't have enough training. So we're going to have to be extra careful for the sake of our clients and for the sake of the business. So, here's what we've known all along, even when I was in, patient care as well. It's the same thing happening here in the NDIS and in aged care. So the bigger picture for me is not just about me. It is going to be about me showing you a way to approach your assessments, but it's also going to be a bigger picture that I need to introduce you to. That alone is a majority of the issue, but without the governance and the financial management being attended to within your organisation, without participant safety and well-being being attended to as a macro, not a micro, as in micro being doing the assessment, macro being what are the systems holding it together, and the care quality and clinical oversight of the care that you're giving. So that is not about that at the person, face-to-face level. That's about what systems are holding all of this up. And then your regulatory and compliances, if they're not up to speed and you're not doing you're not doing the best that you can to make sure that your systems and processes are able to hold you up in every way across your client care and your staff care. Okay, so it's a big picture as well as this micro that we'll look at in a moment. But, that alone is not the only solution to getting really good care and ensuring that you reduce the harm to staff, harm to participants, and harm to your business as well. Let's have a little quick look at the latest, stats from the NDIS. We'll bring it home to the NDIS. I've really just focused on looking at this last year quarter, the July to September 2024. Now, I want you to when we read this, and we'll only have a quick look at it, I want you to be aware that the biggest states with the largest amount of NDIS. Oh, hang on, I've got to share screen. I usually say to people, make sure I share screen, and I'm going to share screen. Here we go. At least I pulled myself up on it this time. All righty. So here we are. So we'll just have a look here. So I want you to just remember that the biggest states with the largest numbers of participants are New South Wales, Queensland, Victoria, and then behind that, fourth in place there is South Australia. So South Australia has a lot less than the other three states I just named, but it has more than Northern Territory, ACT, and WA. So when we look at this, we look, okay, well, there's ACT, it's not much going on there, but that's a smaller state with smaller numbers. And then we've got New South Wales, which is actually the largest. So we've got 520 reportable incidents associated with abuse, 660, this is in that quarter, associated with neglect, 720 associated with serious injury, 428 in that quarter associated with unlawful physical contact. NT, we won't really bother, they're quite low numbers. Queensland, once again, one of the largest states for participants. We've got 223 abuse, 375 neglect, and serious injury, 489. They seem to get the highest numbers. We've got abuse in SA. So considering they're the fourth in line behind the other three large states, they're pretty sizable numbers in my mind, proportion-wise. Victoria, they've got a lot of serious injury. They haven't got the big numbers up in the abuse that New South Wales has, but they've got a lot of serious injury as well. And then we've got WA, obviously reflecting its size in the market in terms of this. So you can see from here, okay, we've got a lot of serious injury happening at high levels, a lot of abuse happening at high levels, reports, and a lot of neglect. Now, the neglect we can speak to because I believe, given what I see, whether it be auditing or consulting, given what I see, that a lot of that neglect comes down to some of it is intentional in a way that, laziness, but a lot of it I think will be that people don't know what they're doing, and they're just not, they just don't know, they're not trained, they don't know, and neglect occurs from a result of that. Yep. So I'm just going to open the chat box. Are these founded or unfounded? What do you mean by that, Pauline? Are these founded or unfounded? Well, we don't have that information. These are reports. So I said these are reports. Yeah. Reports of, yeah. So I don't have the outcome of that, but these are the reports that are put in. So where were we going with that? So yeah, so I think that for the neglect, I think that's I think it's good because education can really help that. So the more educated and experienced providers and the workers that they have working for them are, I think that neglect can be reduced, because on a day-to-day basis, I do see people and speak with people who really don't know what this is all about. Could you please provide examples of neglect? What is the definition of neglect? Neglect is when people are not getting something that they should be getting. And it could be that they're, it can be in any range of things. But if you look at neglect, I mean, Anne-Marie Smith was a prime example of neglect. She wasn't being cared for properly. So neglect is a deficit, neglected to do something. So neglect will be when somebody should have been getting something but didn't. And that's going to be across a wide range of these of care areas. So it could be around it could be around food, it could be around hygiene. I think we do see a bit of that. It could be around any of those areas. So that's neglect, not giving something that should be given, or not doing something that should be done. So yeah, so that was just a bit of a context. That's why I wanted to give you that, because I do want to go into some meaty stuff. But I did just want to, paint that picture. Staff leaving shift without handover to next staff, that could be considered neglect. Absolutely. It could also be considered a few other things as well. It's not following your job as well, but it results in neglect. So yeah, absolutely. Um, Okay, I don't think there's much else there. So, right, so let's move on. We've just had a snapshot of that. Now, the next thing I want to do is, so for those of you who've come in after we started, we talked about what I would normally do in this particular webinar is show people through my process for identifying risk, managing risk, and monitoring risk. But the difference with this one is I've just painted a bit more of a context around that if you as one person did that perfectly as a support worker or a support coordinator, and then nobody else was sort of following that ball, it could all fall flat. So it has to be this multi-pronged approach, which is, the clinical governance, the on the ground work, which is the doing of the assessments. So we need to have all of these things working together. Otherwise, one part lets the other part down. But let's move over now to sharing my screen. I'm going to start with, I think it's always been useful throughout my career, especially in quality, not just quality auditing, which I've done, but quality managing in some of the large organizations that I've worked for. Prior to that, I think it's really important that we have safety mechanisms. That does contribute to governance, and checklists are the best way to do that. Now, what we've got to make sure that our checklist does, because I do see some providers in audit who have done their best to put in a checklist, and that's great. Like, they're having a real go. I admire that. We've got to make sure that the checklist is in alignment with the standards. So if someone's got a checklist and that checklist may be missing 3 things that were in the standards, it's still not going to, and there's the human side of this, it's still not going to meet the standards. So you're going to get a non-conformity. It's a non-negotiable from the standards point of view, because clearly we can't do anything about the fact that the standards say X, Y, Z at this time. And this is what we are bound to look for. Sometimes we have opinions about whether they should actually be in the standards, but we can't do anything about that at this point. We've all hopefully given our feedback to what the next lot of standards should look like. But so there's the non-negotiable as far as meeting your quality obligations under the Act. And then there's the obligations of, what you want to see done as well. So there's these competing things as well. So to be able to pick and choose, to cherry pick what you're going to make your checklist into, you have to be really aware of what is something that doesn't need to be there. So you sit down with the standards and you write a checklist using that. That's probably the best advice I can give you. Or you find one that's already got all of those pieces of information included in the checklist. So checklist. And the other part with the checklist is using the governance part of that and the accountability, which is, the checklist is great, but if people don't use it and sign off on it, how are you, and I'm going to assume most of you are either owners or managers, how are you going to be sure that the staff or yourself are all doing what is needed to be done? So checklist, most importantly, that is your framework to guide you, which is already aligned to the framework that you're working under called the NDIS quality and safety standards. Yeah. Okay. So that checklist is incredibly important. So I think I was just about to open one for you. No, it's right here because I will in here. 2 seconds. There's so many open here. Just my checklist. That's just an outing checklist. Right. I'm going to open each one. I have actually built this. This is a takeaway for you. When I've talked about that bigger picture. I've actually built a risk management checklist and self-assessment survey. I, I won't give it to you here and now. I'll give it to you after the webinar, but it takes into account not just that face-to-face, that part where you're doing the assessment and the risk assessment and managing that risk. This takes account of all those things I talked about, which are the governance and the higher level stuff, which you can do, and it's just for information purposes, to see, how you kind of are ranking on that managing of participant risk from a whole of point of view, that all those systems are in place. Next, here we go. Here's the participant risk management process checklist, okay? Following something that already aligns to what it is you're supposed to be doing, and even having some of these little bits in here which say, if that's a yes, do this, if that's a no, do that, because I think that when we needed these even before the NDIS was in place, when, we had people who were, organizations that had been around for a long time and had a lot of experience. Now we've got sort of 100 times those organizations. We've got like 150,000 organizations now, as opposed to what we would have had was about 2,000 organizations before the NDIS. So we've got a lot of people to deal with, and we've brought a lot of knowledge or a deficit of knowledge into this space. So I think as much as you can have to guide people and to give them the next thing to do until such time as they've learned it, because we're always wanting to build capacity with people, yeah? So having this checklist which runs people through what they should do, and, a little bit of, for example, I've gone, have you identified any risks while completing the participant initial assessment? See, my comprehensive assessment is a place of flagging. It's not a place of doing the risk assessment. It's a place of flagging what risks I might be dealing with later. If it's thorough enough, you can do that. And you just have, you've covered off as many bases as you can by flagging things in a comprehensive assessment. And then which risks you're going to pursue afterwards, and then having a big enough risk profile that, as a risk assessment form, that asks many, many things, most of which will not be an issue for the majority of people, but you asked it and if we don't ask, we'll never know. If we're not curious enough to ask, we can't know. And what we also know about incidents is that the preventable, when the root cause analyses are done on some of the hospital and aged care incidents, serious incidents, it is that if they were assessed or risk assessed properly, this would have been avoided. The majority of them will have been avoided. And so knowing that makes them preventable, and knowing that you can actually go forward with a plan of action in how you'll manage that. I'll just check the chat. Yes, I'll give you the checklist, and I'm going to give you that self-assessment as well, which goes broader, because this checklist deals with the actual siloed, this is the risk assessment, and the checklist deals with the bigger vision of what's going to support you if you're doing that correctly, because there's nothing worse than doing that work correctly and being let down above you by an accountability and a governance that's just not in place. Yeah. And I find a lot of people want to leave their job if they're good at it. They want to leave their job if they're doing an incredibly good job at what they do, and what's above is not lining up with that level of value. They're being let down all the time. So, the last person I've got as an auditor was just that. She just, over a few years, got very tired of being let down at the top because she was doing all of the quality management work, and it wasn't, the governance was not in place to ensure that that worked at all levels. So she got fed up. So yeah, so we've got these prompts which are there, which also, it's not just, and they're not just prompts to assist people doing their work. That's great. That's what we want. But it's also evidence. So one of the reasons I developed this was because I just wanted clients to be able to come to audit and say, here's what I've done. And this is just a lovely piece of evidence, as well as it's a bonus. I mean, what we wanted people was to know what to do and be following a process for sure. But it's also a bonus because at audit, it shows an auditor not only that it makes our job easier, which is good. I always want to do that. But it also shows, wow, okay, look what they've got in place. Look what they're doing. They must, it makes us have confidence in you that if you're doing this with your processes, I'm probably going to see some good things. Yeah. When we see the opposite of this, it's like, oh God, what's this day going to be like for us? So yeah, there's a whole lot of reasons why you would want this. Number one, it works. And number two, it's going to give people confidence as well. Plus, it teaches people as they're doing it. So you might hire someone who hasn't got a clue. They've never done this before, but they'll follow something like this, and they'll follow it for long enough, and they'll start learning and adding to their knowledge. So, it works on a number of levels. So that's a checklist. That's the value of a checklist, and you will get that checklist. The next thing to show you is, so that's starting at the beginning of the individual face-to-face piece of this puzzle, which is the identifying the risks and the management of the risks and monitoring the risks. So we've just looked at the checklist. Just so many documents open here. Remember, I'm not going into the comprehensive assessment, but I did say that my comprehensive assessment is a place of flagging what might be a risk so that I know which risk assessments I'm going to need to do. Yeah. And what happens in my comprehensive assessment is, because it flags these things, and I do have it here. And I'm not going to go through it because we're not doing comprehensive assessment, we're doing risk assessment. It flags certain things. Like in here, we ask about, if they live alone, if the person's living alone, and that is a flag to then do a living alone assessment. But we don't down tools in our business and go and run over and start doing, grab a living alone assessment. We flag everything, and then we go back and do the risk assessment after this. Yeah. So we just have a few places in here where we ask, are they living alone? Is there any physical violence or abuse? We might ask, what else do we ask? We'll ask about, coming up here to the red things, if they're coming from another service or from hospital, if they're in SIL, they are required, you're required to do a comprehensive health assessment plan for this person. So we're just flagging a number of things. Here's another one for a transition. Are they coming from a service or another hospital, or from a hospital? This speaks to being a transition risk. When people are having a transition, their risk of going off track is quite great. So knowing that and dealing with that is really important. So yeah, that's what our comprehensive is for. So now we've done our comprehensive. Let's just say we've identified, oh, they've talked about them having had a few falls. So then we might go, well, we know that we're going to have to do a falls risk assessment. So, we would hop over at some point, you space these assessments out, and we do that falls risk assessment for that person because we flagged that was an issue. There's a person who we've seen has some mobility issues, but they're going to have, and that would also be something that you might want to do a falls risk assessment. We would also, the outing assessment. If we're taking someone out on an outing, we are actually supposed to do a risk assessment. The standards say that we will. We've heard we've heard a lot of feedback from people. I think it's one of the areas where it needs a bit of work in the standards. But if you are taking someone out, you are supposed to do a outing risk assessment. It might be an outing that you do all the time, so one assessment is enough, and maybe just repeating it on an annual basis, perhaps. But yeah, so especially this will become important where people have falls or behavioural risks as well. So we say we'll flag that, etc., and we're going to do that. I think also we've got our environmental and manual handling risk. When you're working in somebody's home, you're obliged to have done an environmental risk assessment of the home. And when you are using manual handling to care for someone, you are also obliged to have done a manual handling risk assessment as well. So I'm not saying that each person needs every one of these, but these are the types of risk assessments that you'll have beyond your main risk assessment. When we talked about the people coming from hospital, we are obliged under the standards to have a participant transition in or out plan. So, for example, if you're having a client that's coming from hospital, you would want a discharge plan from them. If you're sending someone to hospital, say they're in supported independent living, and they're going in for a hospital admission, it would be wise to send them with one of these transition forms, because what we hear from the hospital staff, the nursing staff, especially where people have behaviours of concern, but also complex health issues where communication is an issue, what we're hearing is that they just don't know what to do with them. They just, people being left in hospital without enough information. So what would be the right thing to do would be to send a transition plan with somebody going on a planned admission, or even if it's an emergency admission. I think also when I'm referring someone, I send a transition plan with them. And one of the reasons I do that, I can remember asking for one when somebody came to me from another support coordinator, and they said, no, I'm not going to do that. And I thought, why would you not give me that? So it took me 3 hours of that person's time to actually find out all the information that I needed. And they had very few hours left in their plan. And that could have been mitigated by that person simply giving me a transition plan to tell me what all the risks that they knew about that person, et cetera, would have saved that person 3 hours in their plan. So these are the things that the standards talk about. Obviously, there is always proportionality that needs to be applied with them. So those are different types of risk assessments for different things that you may flag in your comprehensive assessment. What I'll do now is go straight to the risk profile, which is what I do straight after my comprehensive assessment. Now, if the person is not able to sit for that long, that's fine. It doesn't have to be, on the same day. We can do it the next day. Sometimes this is broken up across a few sessions, and that's okay too. So it's not a one size fits all, right? You might even find that your comprehensive assessment takes a couple of sessions as well. What I always suggest to people is whatever information you've already got on that person, populate your comprehensive assessment first. That's less time you have to spend rewriting it from another document or a software. So populate that first, and then you've got a shorter time to be working with them for that comprehensive assessment. So here's what we call a risk assessment and management plan. I think the key thing about your risk profile is when you're discovering. We're in discovery now, we're in identifying. When we were in our comprehensive assessment, we were assessing all areas required as for taking on a participant, but we were also reaching out as much as we could without going into great detail about risk. We were just covering a few areas and flagging certain areas like living alone, etc., and like being in SIL. That's a risk as well. So then we've done our comprehensive assessment, we're going to do a risk profile. So what's really important is to find out to what degree that person or client relies on services to meet their daily needs, okay? And just asking that up front is just the easiest way to go about that. Anyone who needs it daily because they need someone to help them feed, clearly they're of a high risk. And to what extent would that person's health and safety be affected if those services were disrupted? Just gives you an instant, absolutely instant idea of how high on a larger scale that person's risk is in your organisation. Then we go into the lifestyle. This is a comprehensive. Most people do not tick all of these, but if we don't ask, people don't have the skill to uncover things just in a person-to-person conversation. We need to ask, there will be some questions you may already know the answer to, and that's fine too. So relationships and sexuality, because as we know, a lot of people with intellectual disability or some mental health issues are going to have issues around that. Then unsafe lifestyle choices, knowing a person's risk, based on their smoking or alcohol use or drug use as well. Hazard exposure, are they apt to lighting fires, etc.? So it's quite thorough and it needs to be. Environmental and social. What are they like with traffic or in private vehicles or public vehicles? What's their stranger danger like? So their family and carers. What about the religious and cultural aspects? What poses risks for this person around any of these, their social isolation? Remembering, whenever you think, God, it's asking a lot of questions, remember that the stats show that most of the serious injuries were preventable if people asked more questions and got more curious. So it's only a waste of time if you, well, I just don't think it's ever a waste of time. It's not a waste of time when it saves a person's life or makes the quality of life of a person better or saves your business from being sued, or a staff member from being hurt. So just keep on remembering those aspects when it sometimes feels a bit tedious. And I know it does because I've done this work for a really long time. And then around behaviours of concern, this is an example, one that I did one other time. There could be things like intimidation, property damage, harm to animals. If you don't know, if you don't ask, you won't know. The health and well-being. Can you see evidence of neglect? Are they aggressive? Is there aggression from others, etc.? Their eating and drinking profile, very important as well. If you have that person in a supported independent living arrangement, then it doesn't say this in the standards, but the right thing to do, and the thing that was done before the NDIS, was to do something called a My Eating and Drinking Profile to find out all about what that person likes to eat, what they can't eat. And in that, you'll also uncover whether there's any emerging swallowing difficulties. And rather than the swallowing difficulty being found out when someone's coughing and spluttering with a certain food or choking, which happened not that long ago. So yeah, these are things that aren't included in the standards yet for everyone in supported independent living, but I would hope to see that this goes into the standards. Also, if you're feeding people or around them for meal times, and they're not in supported independent living. If you're around them for food, it's important to know or if you're making food for them, it's important to know, because this is where you'll also pick up on speech issues or problems with their diet. So medical conditions, really important again. We're asking all the big questions, you know, and looking for things. We're looking for signs when they've come to you of bruising or abrasions, etc. We're asking to see whether people are subject to seizures, because we know certain diagnoses lend themselves to a lot more seizures. We're asking about respiratory conditions and allergies and skin conditions, endocrine conditions, diabetes. We see a lot of diabetes related and lifestyle related issues around our client groups. Sleep disorders, constipation, incontinence. We're asking the whole kit and caboodle. Now, teeth and gums, really, really important. And I will just add here that if someone is in 24/7 care with you, it is up to you to make sure that they have a comprehensive assessment healthcare plan, and that they do get to the dentist on a regular basis, whatever that regular basis is, 6 months or 12 months. Because if there could be nobody else that's doing that for them. If there's a family that's doing that for them, please get that in writing so that you know that somebody has opted to do this. And also that could happen with doctor's appointments as well. But for the most part, I see the organisation is responsible for the doctor's appointments because family are either unable, or they've aged, or they've passed away. So there's a variety of reasons why family aren't able to help. So asking all these questions, and I see I'm going to run an oral health, how to look after people's oral health soon, because I think it's very, very misunderstood. It is actually one of the most important parts of your body. I was an oral health therapist a long, long time ago. It was my first profession. And if we don't have teeth, that's sometimes why we get swallowing difficulties. As not just from age, not having teeth, you can't chew, you swallow big lumps of food, you choke. And having infection in your gums all the time is very unhealthy for people as well. So really important to ask all of these. This is in the standards, so this is required in the standards. The medical intervention, it's required that you ask for any of the given issues that a person has that you've uncovered, their medical issues, what needs to happen in that situation. So it's really important to ask that emergency medical process or activity that is needing to take place, whether it's because family said, whether it's because they've said, whether it's because a doctor's letter has said, this is what we want to happen. And the standards do refer to that. So, many other things, lots of things. This is very comprehensive, and the people who use it do very well with their clients. People who have really short risk assessments, we see enormous amounts of non-conformities. And, I could say lots of incidents, yes. And sometimes we see few incidents because people don't know what an incident is. And I know that's hard to believe, but we often see that as well. So having no incidents is usually a red flag for us. So we like to see a healthy amount of incidents. And when we see a lot of incidents, obviously there's possibly something going on. So asking a lot about, things like accidental movement, infectious diseases, the manual handling questions are here. I do comprehensive assessment first, the risk profile next, and only do those other supplementary risk assessments if they're needed, because you'll uncover them in comprehensive assessment and the risk profile. You may not need to for the most part, you're not using all of those. There are some clients who will use a great majority of the other risk assessments as well, the smaller ones, supplementaries, but you do comprehensive assessment first and then risk profile next, and then you'll know where you stand, whether you need to do any more or not, okay? And where have we gone to here? Then there's a range of unsafe actions. So, for example, and people giving money away, people losing their wallet all the time, impulsive spending. All of these things lead to a range of those incidents that we see reported to the Commission, in neglect or etc., abuse. So that they're full of a range of those sorts of things. And I guess people just not knowing. Oftentimes, their staff aren't being, their staff aren't trained, or perhaps trained, but it's just not really their cup of tea. So the way my mind works is the comprehensive assessment, then have a risk assessment checklist for your staff or for yourself, which will teach them as well as guide them and give you governance and accountability and quality management in your organisation. Then go straight to your risk profile. And then anything that is of a major nature that, for example, someone's a falls risk, you'll uncover that in the risk profile. If they're a falls risk, do a falls risk assessment. If not, that's great. You can watch and see. So essentially, that's my process. That works really well. It covers off on the standards. If you play with it, that's at your peril. So you can play with things if you know what's a negotiable and a non-negotiable. Yeah, so there are some times where people have, a few years, someone's come and bought all of our policies and procedures. They've gone away. We've gone back and done an internal audit. They've started using some other, they took a liking to another assessment, for example, and they've just got all non-conformities, or they've gone to audit and come back and got all non-conformities with the Commission audit. So you've got to really know what you can take out and what you can't before you go taking them out. So I think I pretty much said my spiel around what I think you need to know, and in the bigger picture, what you need to know in the micro picture, and what helps people and where I see the best results, and where you will see a reduction in incidents if you follow some of these comprehensive processes. So I'll just check the chat now, and then maybe if anyone has some questions or some comments. Here we've got a question from Celeste. If a provider has identified a risk and discussed with the participant, however, the participant may still choose to engage in behaviours, activities, or lifestyle choices that puts them at risk, how would a provider manage the risk while also supporting participant choice and control? That's a beauty. And there, I'll just come back to the one I didn't open, which was, we have two parts to that. So there's risk indemnity, but also understanding and helping your staff. Not all staff will be able to grasp duty of care versus choice and control. It's not, I don't really expect that kind of comprehension from all support workers. I don't. I think it's a difficult one to deal with. But if your team leaders or your management can understand duty of care versus choice and control, that will go a long way towards managing that. At the end of the day, if you can't support the person to do something by managing that risk, then you need to make a decision that if they do it, you'll need to ask them to sign a risk indemnity form. Okay. Because it does come down to choice and control. Now, this isn't just for everyone who wants to do something and you don't feel like helping them through that. What we try to do is assist people to have self-determination and make it possible for them to do something. But, if it's not possible for you to do that safely and it's beyond your organization's risk threshold, then you can ask them to complete this for you, to absolve you of any legal liability. Or, sometimes I've said, look, I don't think we're a good match because I just don't think that one's going to work for me. I think it's really unsafe. I don't feel comfortable about that. And so, maybe there's a better match for you. You've got to kind of determine, because I see a lot of providers just taking what's given to them. You've got to determine for yourself what's your risk appetite, how much risk you're willing to have on your plate, and what you want to deal with. And that might come down to your ability to manage the stress, your staff's ability to manage that person. For example, I have said to some people who are small and quite new at the work, stop trying. They're turning you inside out. Refer them on to a larger provider where they've got so much more money, so much more staff on board, allied health professionals. Sometimes something is not right for you either. It's just not right for you where you're at that time. But if it's, they're the decisions that you have to make. The other thing that I didn't talk about, which I'm sorry about, because I'll just go back to here when we were on the let's talk about back to the risk profile is, okay, let's just say, so, here's my example. So I identified some of these as risks. I do it with color. Most people just do it with a tick, but I've done it with color because I present it. Then we're obliged to actually calculate the level of risk. Okay, so there's lots of matrix for calculating the level of risk. We need to quantify it. We want to quantify what that risk represents that we've just identified. So for whatever it is, let's just say, where's one that I've picked here? Their dental hygiene's poor, right? So let's just say they just do not brush their teeth. They don't want to. They're not interested. Right? There's a risk. Okay. So what's the likelihood of something untoward happening? Well, it could even be, this wasn't set up for this one, likely. So if they're not going to brush their teeth at all, if even down to almost certain. And what is the consequence of that? Well, if they're never going to brush their teeth ever, it's going to be, I'm going to say extreme, but I'm going to say major, because if someone never brushes their teeth, they're going to get tooth decay. They're going to have abscesses on their teeth. They're going to be sick. And in the long term, they're going to lose all those teeth. And then most people don't take very kindly to a denture. So food, nutrition, behavior, keeping them in, etc., it's not going to be good. So that's just one example. So it's asking you to rate that risk. We've identified it above. Now we're rating that risk, and now we've got to manage it. So how do we manage it? So we need to see that you've got a management strategy. You can call it a mitigation strategy or a management strategy or an action strategy. You can call it anything you want, but it should go something like this. Okay, the person, their identified risk, we won't do the dental hygiene one for now because it's already here. This was an actual person in a real example, in a real tutorial. They have someone who falls when they're getting in or out of the bus, right? And so what's this triggered by? What is going to bring this on? Well, their level of environmental awareness was low, they said. Yeah, so they've got poor environmental awareness. And so they often fall when they're getting in or out of a bus. So what's that risk rating? The likelihood and the consequence of that we would have done up here. So let's just say, well, it's likely and, it's quite major. So we would tick it off here, what that said. So likely and major is high. It's an axis. Likely and major is high, the orange. So we would go tick in here. That is a tick in there. Which of the goals of this person is that going to impact? And we want to know this because you know what? Your report that goes to wherever you're going to send your reports is all around how that person's working through their goals. You can see that the NDIS are taking steps to take money away from people. They're going to take money away from people more and more if they're not going to be getting proper goal reports and that people's goals are just not being met or not even being looked at. Yeah. So this is going to continue to happen. You know, you can see people's plans are being reduced. So you want to know what the barrier that stops them meeting, you know, what goal is this going to get in the way of? Community access, it's going to be harder for them to get out. What's the risk treatment for that? And the person came up with the support worker to remind him that the step's approaching and wait with him at the door. So it's really, what happens is if every support worker that works with this person doesn't know that, you are going to have falls, right? So here's where we mean it's preventable. Most of the things that incident will be sent to the commission because it's reportable, they will have hurt themselves. They're so preventable if everybody is aware of the risk mitigation or the risk action plan for that person. Yep. So this is why we say these are all preventable. But if a support worker doesn't know what the risks are for someone, the likelihood increases exponentially that something's going to happen to them. So this is the managing of the risk, okay? This is the managing, the actual where you're writing what you're going to do about it, and its review frequency, and, you know, etc. It doesn't have to look exactly like this. It really does have to do those core things. What's the risk? What's it triggered by? What do you rate it? Is it serious? Is it, you know, low, medium, high? You know, you don't even have to ask which goals is it going to impact. We do. Then what's your treatment strategy? What has to be done to make sure this doesn't happen? How often do you want to review it? And are you going to sort of write a separate plan for this? Because it could have been a really big risk of some kind, like a behavior. So really, this is your management strategy. The other part to the management strategy also needs to be disseminating that information. So we often will see this happen, and then not one person in the organization is told what to do about the risks that are identified, and there's an action form. And there, your system is broken. So it's going to be pure luck if a support worker knows that that person needs assisting on the bus, for example. And the other part is that we don't see anywhere where that they're going to be reviewing that risk. And that's the third part to this webinar. We had identify, we had manage, which is this, writing out an action plan and disseminating the mitigation strategy to the people that are going to be working with your client. And then the monitoring. If we don't monitor that at the frequencies that we've said that we're going to monitor them, really, we don't have a system. We have a piece of paper or a software document that really nothing's happening with. So I always say if you've got no register where these are all inserted into for somebody to be following up and saying, oh, it's time for that review, how more at staff meeting or case management meeting, how are we going with that risk, right? That is the management and the monitoring of this risk. So if we don't have that, we've simply got a piece of paper that's got a management strategy on it that never gets looked at and nobody's monitoring. And for me, my analogy for that is writing it out, doing all the assessment, writing it out perfectly, absolutely perfect. You may as well scrumple it up and put it in the bin, because if you're not going anywhere with it in terms of disseminating it out to the people who need to know and monitoring it on the frequency that you said you will, to see whether there's any deterioration or improvement, you know, could be either, then it's not a full circle. We haven't got the process in place. So that's why we identify, we manage through strategy, yeah, and dissemination. And we monitor to see if there's any deterioration happening, to see if it's working, to see if it's being implemented, to just do our job looking after that person, trying to prevent harm to them. So yeah, now I have completed my loop. So do we have any contributions or questions, comments, contributions? If you can't treat the risk, that's the biggest risk. Exactly, Greg, I agree. If you can't treat it, you know, depending on the size of the organization and the amount of resources an organization has, that can depend on whether that organization can work with people who have that risk, which is really difficult to completely eradicate or even manage. But yeah, when I see smaller organizations, like 5 people organizations trying to manage a client who even a large organization would find difficult, sometimes I have to kind of pry their hands off the client for their own sake. Because if they don't have the resources, it will send them broke, and it does. So sometimes one client with a great risk is costing a person above what they're being paid by the NDIS, or so close to that there's no point. Do you recommend onboarding a new participant to be face-to-face before the initial allied health assessment? I think it depends on the client. I mean, I think there's a lot of support coordination that's virtual, and psychosocial recovery coaching is virtual. So that's okay. And in some of those instances, you may never meet those people. I think it's good if it's face-to-face. But I also think that, sometimes a client, if they don't really like to meet people, you might have to do some of it remotely. I hope it was good. Thanks, Malika. Thank you. So yeah, Mark, it's I think it's always better to do it in person. Celeste, thank you. Oh, thank you very much for coming. Any comments, questions? Anything I didn't cover that you would have liked me to cover? Thank you, Pat. Pleasure, Rita. Thank you, Omar. Yes, I'll email out the risk assessment checklist and that self-assessment as an organization. I would love you to do that and let me know how you go too. Thanks, Greg. Thanks, Sarah. Thanks, Omar. Thanks, Tabitha. I'd really love to know how you go on your organizational one. Thanks, Michelle. Thank you, Carolyn. Thanks, Annie. Thanks, Zico. Thanks, Mark. Thanks, Barbara. Thanks, Kieran Deep. Thanks, Namal. Yes, I'll send you a link to where you can get that. I'll put it in the thing. Risk relating to family potentially not attending the participant's needs. Do you have examples of when this has occurred in your career? Often. So often. And it can be because from ignorance, or it can be from their own mental issues in the household, fatigue for looking after someone. It's a tricky one, and you would normally need to broach it with them in the most, in the most democratic way possible, to try to gain some insight into whether it's on purpose or whether they just don't know. And then you can make a decision about which way you go when you know that. And that also depends, we also have to have this, coming to grips with good enough care. That was an interesting part of my career, in child protection. Good enough, I wasn't real happy with that. But there is good enough care. So that's a tough one. But find out what the reason is first as to why, and look at the actual neglect that you see and really examine it, and ask maybe for some feedback from someone who has a lot of experience. It's good to get a bit of bounce back from someone. Seems like we find a lot of families appear to suffer with care. Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. That's why I say, yeah, find out a bit about that situation first, and really test your theory on the neglect as well. I think it's always good to bounce it off someone. And then when you've got a bit of a clearer picture about the whole thing and what might be causal, and then you can, you know, approach it in the most sensible way. I mean, some people are very difficult. There is, you know, once a person with autism and intellectual disability becomes an adult, can't force them to do anything. And I'm not saying this person is, but you know, that's my experience is, you know, you've got this finite amount of time as a child to try to get people to eat. But we keep trying, you know, keep offering vegetables, even though they're probably never going to take them. And I mean that metaphorically, you know, offering them good lifestyle choices, and they'll take them if they want. Okay, I think I'll close the meeting. It's just reading a chat. Okay, thanks everyone. Bye bye.